Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Cutting Room, the show where we discuss the philosophy, process, and pregame with some of the industry's best content marketers. I'm your host, Tommy is my name, and I am very excited to have our guest on today. We are going to be talking with Shayla Price. She is the founder of primostats.com, a search engine for stats and statistics. If you are the type of content marketer who uses a lot of studies and cites a lot of sources, I highly recommend primostats.com. It is such a game changer and such a time saver. Aside from Primostats, Shayla has also created content for sites like HubSpot, Shopify, BigCommerce, QuickBooks, and many more. I've worked with Shayla for many years now, and she is one of the best content marketers, don't tell anyone else, that I have ever had the chance to work with. So without any further ado, we're going to just jump straight into it. Shayla, why don't you come on to the show and we'll get straight into the questions.
Hi.
Hi, it's good to see you. I'm so happy
Same,
to have you on.
same here. It's glad to be talking content marketing. I love it.
Indeed. Okay, so I don't like the big preamble, so we're going to just jump straight in. What is your philosophy behind content marketing and the role that it can play within an organization?
I think content marketing as a philosophy is more about how you can serve customers. I think that gets lost in the strategy part, the philosophy. We're creating content for search engines, we're creating content for the product, but we often forget to start with the customer in mind and how they feel and what they believe good content looks like. And that's sometimes how we need to just merge that gap of what we think content is and what the customer thinks content is. So when I'm walking into a piece, I'm really thinking about the customer's intent. What do they want to see on this page? And not necessarily all the time what Google wants us to put in there. So I'm always going back and forth between that dilemma of what do I need to write. So I try to approach it more of a content experience and not just a content piece.
What are you doing to get inside of the head of the person? There's a lot of conversation around intent, but it's one that we've diluted as a community. How are you putting yourself inside their head when it comes to uh, creating?
So first, there's the normal things that we do. We talk to support, which we were supposed to do. Actually, get on a support ticket. I've had the opportunity to work with some companies where you had to be part of everybody in the company had to do support tickets. So that was a nice way for me to understand what customers were thinking. And then the thing that I love to do is actually walk through the process. So I'm going to sign up for the product. I'm going to see the things they see and then experience it and then ask myself questions. What would I want if I was stumbling upon this product for the first time? Whether that's onboarding or whether that's a free trial, what things are they receiving in that process? So if you're thinking about intent, is it good to think about, okay, let me look at the customer, speak to them directly, but also just walk through what they're doing during the user journey. So keep that in mind.
I love that. What that that brings up a different question for me too, and maybe these two feed into each other. What are you doing to stay off the hamster wheel? Right? You talk about how we all kind of get into this rhythm of creating for search engines and forgetting about the customer and losing the intent, right? How are you staying off that hamster wheel and not creating for the sake of creation, but rather keeping yourself dialed in and connected to the piece of content that you're creating?
One, I have a checklist for that. So just like you have an SEO checklist, just like you have all these other checklists for the production, you should have some type of checklist of customer intent or customer research, so that you're putting that into the piece and keeping it at the forefront. Um, Also, I just I like to think of content broadly. So it's important to know that content marketing is only a piece of it. There's content in support. There's content that's on the landing page, but there's content in the email. There's content within the organization on how to
Mm-hmm.
speak to the customer. So there's sales enablement. So over the years, I've learned to not create content for content marketing, but just to create content to create content, and that's has been very helpful.
That is fantastic. Yeah, we've heard. I was talking with Brooklyn Nash a few weeks back, and that was one of the things he was talking about was that we have to look at content with a capital C, right? It's not just like we can't conflate blog posts with content.
You're right.
Yeah. So we're actually editing his piece today, but he says, hi, he works at Gorgeous, and they are an amazing e-commerce help desk. So what's up, Ryan?
Hi.
Yeah. So here's the question. When it comes to those different types of pieces that you're going out, actually, you mentioned you have a checklist, and I want to, would you be willing to share that checklist with the audience?
I don't have that on not on this computer.
No, okay. Well, I mean, after the call,
Yeah, I can share the checklist.
afterwards in the follow up. But tell me a little bit more about what that checklist entails.
So one, like in the introduction, what was the original intent for the customer to come here? How are they receiving this? What part of the journey are they on? And then two, did this piece come from what inspired this piece? Was it a help desk question that we saw? Was it somebody emailed us and inquired about something? Or did product talk to us and say, like, we're having issues with this and this is with the customer and they need a piece of content to walk them through X, Y, and Z? So I put that as part of my introduction of this of starting that list, and then I go down it and say, okay, we check this off this list. What else can we do to help the customer? What examples do they need? Do they need specific images? Because of course, as we know, stock photos are not necessarily helpful. They're good for, having an image, but it doesn't explain anything. So when I'm thinking about the customer intent and thinking about the research that comes in, I'm first thinking, okay, what inspired this piece in the beginning? And then walking down there and saying, okay, what else do they need to know to help them solve that problem? Because that's what they're coming. Blog posts or content is just solutions. If you look at it like that, you're creating solutions. But it's hard for us as writers to think that. Mostly in product, when somebody creates a product, it's okay. I created this product because it's gonna solve this solution. But content is doing the same thing. You're creating a solution.
All right, next question here, because I know that I've had this experience both in-house and as a freelancer when I was freelancing before. What if you don't have a lot of access to that data, right? I know you've been in that situation where you're working with a big company and there's gatekeepers, you can't get access to what you need from those people, or if you're in a startup world, right, that information doesn't exist.
Right.
What are you doing in that case?
If I know it exists but I can't access that, I'm always trying to make friends with the people who can access it. So I'm using, which don't tell security this, I see this, but I'm using those shared passwords to get access to that data. But if it's a startup and it's limited data, you still have some support chat tickets that's coming in, or even talking to if it's content in regards to support or in regards to the product, you can talk to the product manager, especially at a startup. It's small, everything is mostly flat. They know the issues that they're having. But when it comes to SEO, you are taking some shot in the dark when it comes to SEO at a startup because you don't know what's going to work or not. But you have to take educated guess. You know what this product is. You might look at some of the competitors and see what things have come up. You might be going to communities or forums of those competitors and what issues they may talk about. So there's ways to think about it holistically and not just be so consumed about getting the data in-house. Again, even going through the journey yourself, thinking like that persona and trying to figure out what they want. But as things start moving in the house of content, you're going to get access to some of that data. But share a password, befriend somebody, and get a password.
There's a lot we could talk about there as far as like soft skills and potential security risks, but we won't get into that part. But I just want to add on to that too, because I've been in the position when we met. We met when I was at Shopify, right?
Yes.
Yeah, when we were doing the market research initially, we didn't have customers really. We didn't have a lot of the stuff that we would traditionally have. So we were looking at things like, comment sections on other blogs. What were some of those reviews that were happening out there and the questions that people were having. Reddit, right, is an amazing place for scraping information. Hey, Rick.
Hi, Rick.
So the idea of like the market research exists out there, right? We want to find the market research and what are people saying, and even triangulate it, right? Not just your own support stuff, because that's helpful, but you can also look more broadly across the spectrum as well. All right, so we are at 5:11. So what I would love to ask you now is tell me a little bit more about that process. Right? You've got the process. We've kind of talked about this a little bit more, but dig into the process specifically about your ideation and then how you're going through that process from ideation to publication.
Okay. So let's say it's a startup. We don't know the keywords. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to first look at some customer support tickets if it's available. I'm going to talk to product managers. I'm going to talk to previous marketing director to figure out what is the core of the product. What's the solution? And also, too, we have to add the business goals to this. We haven't talked about that. So what's the KPIs that I'm reaching? Because that's the main point. I have to think about the customer. I have to think about the KPIs in this equation. And then finding those keywords is basically trial and error, as people know when it comes to SEO. You're going to find your list, stick to it, start creating content, whether that's pillar pieces. Of course, but a lot of people still use pillar, and I enjoy it. I think it works, but it might not necessarily work for creating a content experience. I think when you're doing that, you have multiple content types. So you just don't have blog posts. You might have case studies, you might have white papers. But just going back, once I have a particular keyword, if it's for SEO, then I'm working through that to the same standards as everyone else, thinking about the headline, thinking about where I'm going to put keywords, but also how does this all fit into the rest of the content I have to create when I'm doing my planning and strategy as a whole. Not just trying to create pieces, but trying to create a collective strategy for how this is going. How are people? And I think too, I'm always wondering what happens if someone read all my content. Because we don't think that. We think people just. Well, most people don't think that's got the right. Like, oh, this is just this piece, and this user, this person's gonna read it, and that's it. But how do they all connect? And so I'm trying to think of the ecosystem of, okay, this is if it's just a blog, fine. But what about the support? What about the knowledge base? How do we connect the knowledge base content to the blog? How do we connect what's happening, UX copy that's happening in the product? How do they know which button to press unless I tell them to press it? Give them content. So that's why I say it's not just marketing, it's just content as a whole. And then I have to think about the people who are doing the sales, the customer success. Like, we have to provide enablement tools as well. If they're talking to the customer in one way, and then I have a post and a case study that mentions the product in a different fashion, everybody's confused. So I'm having to constantly bring in stakeholders at the initial stage of my content strategy, because I don't know how are people talking. So setting those tone and style guidelines that are not just editorial, but for the entire organization, so that they understand how we're going to move forward. So a little bit of branding in there, I guess, but from the content perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I've talked about that quite a bit with different people, where it is important to realize that things can't live in isolation, because that's not what your customer sees on the other side. And
Right.
then, to your point of what does it look like if somebody reads everything, that's really important to break down those silos internally, because otherwise you have a schizophrenic looking brand overall,
Yes, a
right? So
brand.
and you can't have that. And I've seen this. I've seen this happen with a lot of organizations who they grow over time, and the content team is treated as sort of their own individual silo.
Hmm.
And then the conversation from the content page or the article to the landing page, and then the landing page they talk to the sales team, and then the sales team is using a whole different set of language and a whole different vernacular, which becomes very disorienting.
Yeah.
I yeah, I do want to ask, because you've kind of brought up SEO here. How are you balancing SEO and keyword SEO and human centric content?
To me, they're all the same because
Okay.
I'm focused on more human than SEO. Um, but I'm also trying to think about how I can outdo the competition of what they've already written, and that's the standard, making it a long post, adding images, adding quotes and examples and things of that nature. But Google moves at Google's pace. So I can't necessarily worry too much about that. But if I focus more on creating great content that's for the customer and linking, doing my internal linking and external, getting people to link back, I'm more of the wait and see type person, which is can be hesitant for the for my marketing director or whoever is asking, but I am more of I got my checklist. I know what good content is. I know what customers want. And if we keep creating something great and following these guidelines and these guideposts, something good is going to happen at the end. As long as you have a standard, and I think that's where it comes where there's no strategy. We're just doing things one by one. But if there's a set plan in place, I'm not too concerned about this one little post not making it to page one today. It may make it tomorrow. So it's just keeping the long term mindset, and also educating other people who are not content oriented about that long term process. So when I'm thinking SEO and human, I'm just thinking, let me focus on the customer.
And how are you educating folks who don't know?
Keeping an open mind, meeting people where they're at, and then also figuring out what they know about content, and understanding that they may have preconceived notion of what it is, and then just busting those myths, saying no, it's not going to, it takes this amount of time. Google has to do X, Y, and Z. A piece of content can't be written in one day because
Right.
the writer is doing this, and this, and these are steps they have to take. Um, and then also being prepared for those conversations. A lot of times we go in as content marketers and like something, it didn't get the result they wanted in that quarter. But if you're prepared to know why, I think your higher up knows, like, okay, you have a reason for not achieving that particular goal. But things, you really have to have a strategy and understand people's thought process, and seeing other things where you can provide, because it's not all about organic search. Again, content is the entire organization. So maybe that quarter you provided X, Y, and Z, um, X, Y, and Z product collateral to the sales team. So there's other metrics that need to be involved than just sticking to achieving organic search or getting people to come to the site.
I'd love to hear you kind of talk a little bit more about those soft skills too. We brought this up a few weeks back with Brooklyn, I believe, where it was the soft skills going in and not treating everything, like not being the hammer for everything as a nail, right? I'm
Right.
butchering that metaphor. But what do those soft skills look like when you're meeting people where they are, and how are you having those conversations to sort of suss that out?
Having empathy, understanding that everybody doesn't know what you know, which is the good thing about your organization. They hired you because you're the expert. So understanding that people are not supposed to know content and you're supposed to be here to educate them. So be the
Mm-hmm.
teacher, show them what you can do and what is not possible for your particular team. Um, Also, negotiation. You need, I think people also don't think about negotiate. We negotiate going into a job, but we don't necessarily negotiate the KPIs and the realism of those KPIs. So having those hard conversations like, no, this may not be possible because of X, Y, and Z, but I can do this instead, and keeping an open mind and seeing where how they react to that, and just being prepared to for rebuttals.
All right, here we go. I'm going to give you a rebuttal. I want more leads. How come you can't get me more leads tomorrow? What's that conversation look like?
So we can't get more leads tomorrow because we haven't set up the system. We haven't set up the system to create the collateral for it. It takes X amount of time to get there, and we need writers. We need the infrastructure. We haven't paid such and such to do this.
Yep.
But however, I can get you leads in March, and I will need X, Y, and Z to accomplish that. Is it okay to proceed?
Yep. I think that's important. It really is important that we're able to set those expectations and be that expert going in there. And something that I try to tell people in general is that everybody already has the movie written in their head, right?
Yeah.
They know what they want it to look like at the end, but they don't necessarily know how to get there. And it's really important that as professionals, as content marketing professionals, we can help people see what it takes to make the movie, right? And just because they have a keyboard and we have a keyboard doesn't mean that we can just bust stuff out and see what's in their head. So
Right.
having that conversation internally about what people expect from this is, I think, critical. And if I'm understanding that correctly, that's essentially what you're saying there, yeah?
Yes, and if
Yeah.
possible, hold workshops.
Yep.
Give a day in the life of a content marketer.
I
Because
love that.
some people don't understand um, what Google does,
Mm-hmm.
and when they just want content to appear, and that's what they think when they type in on their everyday experience. They think, okay, you type something in, Google has it listed, and some of your colleagues don't even know there's beyond a page one. So you
Right.
have to inform them that there's millions of pages after that. And we have to fight our way up to get to page one to being part of that top 10.
I remember having a conversation with a broader team along the lines of what you're talking about too, with like it was the content team, but then it was like advertising and then like the bigger brand organization. And we had done something very similar to that where we asked people how much traffic do you think comes from organic versus paid in search? And what was surprising to me was that the majority of people thought it was right around 80% came from paid advertising, not from the organic side. And having that sort of gauge up front was something that allowed us to really reframe the rest of the conversation around that because, like you said, it's meeting people where they are.
Yeah,
So I love that.
once people understand that your job is just not writing, they have they're more
Right.
open to understanding like this entire process that goes behind it and what tools you use. They'll be amazed that you're using like 10 different tools just to, so we can get to page one. It's like
Right.
in their data, like they only using two. So like, okay, I'm gonna leave them alone.
Absolutely. Let's see here. So a less visual to comment, right? The press release. Yeah. So we're gonna get into. I want to know your pregame, right? We've talked a little bit about philosophy. We've talked a little bit about process. You've gotten all of this information. Now you're about to get into the draft. What does that pregame process look like? And then we'll get into the live edit.
So it looks like me just look at like first of all, what is this piece supposed to be about? I would assume I would have written a brief. I would have a brief. So I may have the keyword, the potential topic, the headings. I have some. I've even done some research myself on the topic, so I can know what is out there on the search engine and also in our content database. What have we written before? Also, what question? Going back to the customer, what does this solve? What will this content piece solve? Where will it be? Of course, we haven't even hit distribution, so it's just thinking about all those things when it comes to just the research side of the customer and then how the customer is going to receive this and then what part of the user journey they're in. So that's my headspace when I'm reading something for the first time. I'm just trying to get a understanding of where is this belong and what is the goal of this piece. Is it to rank? Then we can just go all out on SEO's things, or is it really just to inform the customer when they're landing on our site and it's a nice piece? So keeping things relative to what the customer needs and what we need as well.
And as you're writing, or you have all the information there, as you're writing or as you're editing, how is that like flowing through you? Like I know it's a weird thing. It's a weird thing, but I know when I write, specifically when I write, I like keep this intention in mind as it's like trying to flow through me that way. What does that look like for you? Like it's a weird question, but does that play itself into you now that you have all the information? Does it like internalize and you channel it? How's that work?
I feel like it does happen that way. Of course, I have the brief, and I may take some notes if it's a longer piece or if this is a piece that the higher ups are going to expect, and they have expectations for it. I might jot down some notes and the other stakeholders I might have to call upon to help me with this piece. But yeah, all of that's just churning through my head. Okay, this is the piece. Where is it going to be? Does this make sense? How would the customer want to read this, and why would they read this? I'm constantly asking questions in my head. So I don't ask them out loud. So it's kind of weird, like you said. It's just it's
Yeah.
happening in this engine.
Well, I think that's important too because one of the things that you have the a unique ability to do is have that the words that you write lift themselves off the page, right? It's not just this flat thing. I'm asking myself questions as I'm going through it. You're preemptively answering questions and I think all of that research that you're talking about ahead of time is like that's the main reason is what questions to anticipate. You seed that, and then you're answering them as people are going through the piece. I love it. Let's see here. So we're at 5:29. Let's get straight into the edit. And if anybody has any questions in the chat, please feel free to ask, and we can just address them as we're going along. So if you want to share your screen, we can bring the article up, and we'll go straight into it. There we go, and I'll focus the screen here.
Can you see?
I sure can. Can everybody in the chat see? I think so.
I'll widen it a little bit so when I'm making comments.
There we go.
So I did some research. Like I always do on the this particular topic. So I already know it ranks for SEO. It's doing a great job. Um, so I'm looking at this piece right now from a content experience point of view, and that's how I'm going to edit. So I'm not usually a fan of quotes in the beginning
Why
because
is that?
I feel like the custom is the person reading it, the first words they see is somebody else's and not mine or not what you just automatically go to somebody else's words and not the words of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
When you
So I
open
think
up a
this would
piece,
be. Hmm?
sorry, when you open up a piece, first thing, what do you do?
I usually scan.
Scan. Okay.
And like this piece, I see it lacks images, not that many images. Also, I see repetitive um, additional resources. I don't know if this will be helpful to constantly be bringing them out of the piece instead of staying on the page. So that might be helpful at the back end, or just having one or two of those sprinkled in the piece, and then maybe not just doing like this is right here is what 5, maybe just doing 2 additional resources. Um, but the first thing I'm noticing, there's not many images. So like there's a lot of text that's they need to read this and they're gonna like see these blocks. Even though we have bullet points, they see these okay. So like even if I'm scanning naturally, it's like okay, how long do I need to get to the to the next thing? So that's what I'm worried about for the user that's reading this. So when I'm looking at the first thing, I'm like, oh, I probably would add a code opening because since we're talking about audience segmentation, I would prefer um, a failed attempt at it and to get the reader to see what because as humans we like things that fail and so they'll grab their attention and then they also learn a lesson behind it just from the introduction. So if X company failed at doing this and this is why, and then it goes into knowing more about it. Of course, I like stats. And so the first thing I'm thinking is this up to date?
Yeah. What's the moratorium on statistics for you?
So everybody is having a discussion about this. People hate old stats. I would say 5 years, but that depends. It really does depend because if no one's bringing up their research, um, how are you supposed to get the latest stats? So if what is it, co-schedule didn't produce a different document for 2020 and you don't have it if you're trying to look for a different source, and that's why I probably would, since it's 2018 and then we're dealing with marketing topics, I probably would try to look up a different source and just see if it exists. Let's see.
I love this, by the way. We've got a little subtle plug here for Primo Stats and how this builds right into the add-on on Google Docs. What a great demonstration of how
I'm
this
really just
works.
looking honestly.
I'm not calling you out. I think this is amazing.
So yeah, say I have a 2019. But again, another caveat: don't add stats just because they have that. You have that context. So that's why I encourage people to look at the methodology of the report because you don't know what is the demographic. So what type of marketer I'm thinking? That's the only question I would have. So um, be specific when it comes to this of adding that. Here's the comment.
Just so everybody knows, too, we've put in the chat, if you want to look at the view only link, you can follow along as Shayla is doing her thing inside the article.
I love this. Of course, I would assume it's going to be jump links. I think somebody has been is doing a great job at this. Even at take this illustration for example.
Oh, Ryan's no joke. Ryan's
Yeah,
very good at what he does.
yeah. Like that's what I'm saying. This is not a piece that I'm not editing for grammar. So,
Right.
For this, I probably would use a different example, an illustration, because it can get a little confusing. Okay, I got these shapes. I get the concept. I probably would use like even if it's like brand logos, maybe like something simple where everybody's gonna gravitate. So if it's McDonald's and Burger King, and then I have like Popeyes and another fried chicken place, so that you can see it automatically. You can see the illustration, like
Yep.
instead of just seeing these objects of color, shapes, and quarters. Use something that people are already accustomed to seeing, and which is brand logos. Everybody knows those, even kids. So I probably would use a different illustration to segment and show that what audience segmentation is.
Nice.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about images in general, right? Because you had mentioned before no stock imagery, and I know I have my feelings on images.
Yeah.
How are you going about the sort of visual storytelling versus the textual storytelling?
One, if it's in the piece and you can illustrate it, do so. If it makes sense, like don't just create an image to create an image. And there's going to be different purposes. Like I would read this. I'm reading this article for readability. Okay, what's missing that can enhance the content experience instead of letting me veer off or get confused. Or if somebody taps me on the shoulder right now, will I go to them or continue with this piece? And then two, visuals, I'm thinking about shareability, especially on social. So how can somebody like myself who writes content for other marketers, how can I right click this image, save it to my desktop, go to my Twitter, upload it on Twitter and write something. And I think that's also important. As I'm doing more social media for Primo Stats, I'm honestly going into like the promotion tab at Superpath, and I'm looking for articles. I click an article and I'm looking if I can actually quote somebody. It's hard. It is very hard to quote somebody. So you got to think, can you create a short sentence? Can someone reads this who's not even necessarily your customer, but is your customer in the way of shareability, helping with SEO and keeping all that in mind? How can somebody come here and just copy and paste and put it into a social media post so that they can share? Because we're thinking about how our social media manager is going to share. We're thinking about, let's do the tweet that that you can click in that, which I don't see that often anymore. But how can somebody who is just trying to share your content copy and paste a sentence and move on instead of have to make something work? So if I'm making something work, I'm just not going to share it.
I think what's interesting about that too, and it kind of comes up to this theme that you've talked about before, where it's understanding where this piece of content exists within an ecosystem, right? We've got, articles and help desk content and like a number of different types of pieces, and how do those things interact with each other? But then what you're saying, or what I'm hearing anyways, is that you have to also understand what this is going to look like in a busy feed somewhere.
Yes. And for content distribution, you're not the person distributing it all the time.
Right.
So keep that in mind. Make it easier for other people. Because even if your customers want to share it, like, oh, this is what I found. And it's like, it's going to take me 10 minutes just to share a piece of content. I don't want to share it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and content itself, when people are sharing your content, it's important, I think, to think of it as social capital, right? Mm-hmm. Like what people share says something about them, mm-hmm. and they might be staking their reputation on sharing your stuff with somebody else. So
that's important. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. And I want to share stuff that makes me look smart. Exactly. So audience segmentation for choosing who to ignore. I like that. Not a fan of this one because it's a big block of text. This might do better of either just using that one sentence or getting just getting an expert quote from somewhere else and adding the person's picture. So from those resources like Hero or just a Twitter call out. Because I don't know if the reader is just going to read that, going to take the time to read that from somebody else again. It has to be short. How many words is this? Yeah. Usually they say keep it to 50 words or less, because that's just standard for any style. I think APA or MLA. But for us as content marketers, I'm usually trying to keep it 25 to 30 if I can. And that also includes like this is this person, they work at such and such. So keep that in mind.
Oh, Shayla, sorry. We're getting a little bit of scratchiness from your mic right now.
This works.
There we go. Better.
So I would take this out.
How much quantifiable, because I know I do this sometimes, but how much are you using the numbers to quantify certain things in the content you're creating or in the content you're editing?
What do you mean by numbers? Just stats or?
Sure. No. Sorry, I'll give you an example. So I was editing a piece not too long ago and it was very quote heavy, and I was looking at the ratio of quote text versus original thought. Right? Do you do anything like that?
Usually 2 to 3 every 1,000 or 1,500 words, but it also depends on the style guide of the brand. If that's what their audience expects, fine. But I would keep it limited to like 3 or so for 2 to 3 for 1,000 words. But I know great articles come from Big Commerce and they have like a slew of people. But I think that's the expectation that they have set. So if you're not setting the expectation of all of a sudden I see like a quote from everybody, and then if you stated up front, like this post is we're going to hear from 13 experts, that's fine. But just to have their ideas all in the post is like, is this post original? Like, am I just going to hear from experts? Like, then it's like, it's just it's after a while it's just advice. Mm-hmm. So what's the solution? It's like going to a motivational speaking engagement. I need the action steps after. I just don't want to be motivated. So, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned big commerce because Tracy Wallace was our very first guest, and
Yes, I
she
love
was
her.
saying as a matter of policy, when they were when she was at Big Commerce, it was like a bunch of quotes for every single one of the things because it helps back that stuff up.
Yes.
There's something interesting there about baking that into the style guide, and I love that you bring the style guide up as a result of that. So cool. All right, let's jump right back in.
You're fine. It's cool. Hands out. I think something else that, besides the expert quotes, I'm thinking, and that, like, is there a way to give instead of telling them what to do in this, like, create more specific, relevant messaging? And I see they have the example right here. Ryan has the example, Nike, but like, hmm, this might be a good moment to like show me, like either
Okay.
with an image or illustration or an actual messaging. So I feel like I'm getting something out of it. Like, okay, I can use this today, especially like I'm not sure what the. I'm assuming this is B2B, um, for B2B marketers. So again, they need something to make, like, to do their jobs better. So
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not just, okay, great, I know about audience segmentation. So where do I, like, I feel like I need that. And he might continue with that. Maybe it's too soon, but I feel like I'm down the article enough. I need, give me something that I can go do this right now, and maybe I can revisit it later.
Yep. I think it's important to, this is something that I try to call out when it comes to knowing your audience, and maybe this is the case with this piece, so take this with a grain of salt. But the examples that you
So yeah.
use, right? Is Nike something that's going to be relatable, or should you use a no-name brand, or not a no-name brand, but like as a lesser known brand, so it's more relatable to the person reading it?
It's all about context. So if it's a
Right.
lesser known brand, you have to tell me a little bit more. I think
Right.
it's favorable to use those big name brands because I have some idea what they do. Um, so I can, like, okay, oh, what Nike's doing. So, and but sometimes you do have to, I don't force it. If it's there, use it. But if you can use a lesser known brand, it makes perfect sense and you can tell their story. It's not going to be told in this one sentence. With the lesser known brand, it's going to take a couple paragraphs probably, but that is helpful. Like, um, just relate to people again where they're at. If they see Nike, their eyes might perk up and feel, or if they even see a competitor. Like, if you're writing specific, if you know some of your audiences have a specific, like if it's just fitness, if you know who do they look up to, so they are constantly like trying to figure out their keyword research or their audience segmentation, they all battling each other, that would be helpful. And be like, okay, this is where you want to be. So this has examples, but I see just examples of each thing. So is this not necessarily examples or just um, explanations of concepts? So I don't know if I would use, maybe change the word in there. There's so much. This might not
What
even be
would
needed
what would you suggest around there?
around.
The with examples, like what kind of wording would you might maybe switch it around to?
Hmm, I feel like you already have it, is tights. Or yeah, because even down here, dive into the 3 types.
Yeah.
I guess these are the examples, but
So we might even be able to cut for with examples altogether.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then this might not be needed. There's so much to learn about new. Like I'm already down here. If I'm already down here, I don't need that. You can just start. Like you can cut this.
I want to speak to that for a second too while you're going through there. One of the things that I've noticed when I edit pieces is there's this what I call the roller coaster effect, right? Where we will uh, where you'll read an article and you have the subheader, or you've got the headline, you've got the sort of ramp up, you've got the next subheader, and it ramps up again. It goes like this, and then it peaks back down. And we continue to have this roller coaster as we go through the piece. And what that can do as a reader, if you are reading every word, is it can get a little exhausting because it's kind of got the same cadence as we go up, right? We're reiterating what the subheader says. Now we're going to talk about what we just talked about. Now we're going to wrap it up. Then we're going to reiterate what the subheader just said. And the way that I personally like to visualize this, and I know that you do this, I don't know if you do it on purpose or if you do it instinctually, but the way that I like to think about it is less like a roller coaster and more like a waterfall. How can we draw people all the way down, and the subheaders are more of an emphasis point than it is a stopping and starting point. Right. So just my own little bit of advice there, because I know you do. I've edited your pieces before. Yeah. I know you do this kind of instinctually.
Yes. So yeah.
Well, is it instinctual, or are you doing it on purpose?
Well, I learned it from you, the roller coaster. Like you don't want to be on a roller coaster, and it has its purposes, but maybe not for a blog post. So maybe from maybe an ebook, or it might. I feel like it can be helpful to contain content because people are not reading everything. So maybe I want them to end, and they can go back. At least they got that, and they feel like they've settled in, and maybe they'll revisit this, or maybe even if there's a call to action to the company there, like, okay, this is, we know based on looking at our research on how much you scroll down the page, maybe that's a good point to contain it there instead of containing it at each header. So find out when you're looking at your heat maps, we know people are only going down 30-40%. Put your endings there, like your soft ending there, and then move on with the piece and not have any.
It's all about being intentional about it. Right?
Yes.
Breaking your own patterns and being intentional about how you use these things, more than just like following the pattern of whatever your own writing is. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, let's hop in here a little bit more, and then I think in just a few minutes here, I'll ask you your kind of overall final thoughts.
Okay. This is weird. I'm not liking these at all. And maybe you, instead of having that in paragraph, you have the additional resources based on the content page where people normally stop. So either use I don't know, in this piece, or just or at the end, place at the end. I feel like I don't I don't want them to go somewhere else. If they're going
Right.
somewhere else, they should go to another blog post made by us to give them additional information. So just to like, I know we only have a few minutes, so uh,
Well, there have been, and we can jump out of the edit now if you'd like. There have been a few things that have come up as we're kind of talking here that have stood out to me, and some of that comes down to that intention. See, I'm trying to say this word and I can't. Being intentional. There we go. Some of that's what's coming out for me, but the other part of that is you've mentioned, you've kind of alluded to structure, right? What's the structure of a piece? And then one of the other things that really stood out is the heat mapping and the analytical data. Tell me more about that. How's that play into your overall process when you're looking at the bigger picture of content with a capital C?
just trying to figure out if what we're doing is making sense for the KPI. So, like you mentioned, like I'm not getting leads. Is the call to action at the bottom, and we do people actually get to the bottom? And looking at that data, and what can we do to enhance that? Even I've done to the point where we changed a button from blue to orange, and magically everybody can see it, and leads start rolling in for some reason. So, but you have to have it. I think that's, and in startup world, or where you might be in a big organization and you don't know what that data is. I think that's your first step if you're entering into a job, or even if you've been in a job for 2 or 3 years and you don't have access, start asking for those tools. Because I think every year or so, people say, I see in like in communities, oh, I have a budget. What should I use the budget on? And everybody's going straight for Grammarly and, and other
Right.
things. But I would even tell you to um, go straight for the sources when it comes to data, so that it can have a business objective, so that you can get either that's the leads or the traffic, and then everything else becomes secondary. Because if you want to keep your job or you want to do good, it's always going to start with the KPIs. So start there and then wiggle your way down into other tools like primo stats. So
Like primo sets. Exactly. I think what's interesting about this entire conversation, and what it's pretty much always tying back to as we've been talking here, is being customer centric, right, or being reader centric with that, having proper attribution, knowing what you're doing, and then marrying the two together to create something that's really interesting and continue create something that's very interesting. We've got 2 minutes left here. If you would like, I would love it if anybody in the audience has any questions you'd like to ask. We've got 2 minutes to wrap it up. But while that's happening, can you just sort of sum it all up for us? Like, yeah, sum it all up.
content, don't think of content as content marketing. Content is the entire organization. Service your customers, whether the customer is the user or whether the customer is your stakeholder internally.
There we go. That's powerful. I love it. All right, so we're going to wrap it up right there. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming on. Shayla, I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You taking the time to show us your process and having this conversation. We will be sending out the recording afterwards. We will also have some additional resources available. And next week, if you tune in next week, we'll be having Rand Fishkin of Spark Toro coming on. So we've got a lot of really cool stuff planned. Shayla, is there anything that you wanted to pitch to the audience or give to the audience just for showing up?
Yes, so you can get your first month half off of Primo Stats using the professional plan if you use the code Content Studio. So
Perfect.
use Content Studio at checkout and you can receive that discount.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.